Yeah, that's gonna be so cool.
Yeah, I think it's something she feels really passionate about. I mean, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I like her.
People need to get more attention.
Yeah, there's some that I think about like acupuncture. I didn't get to see her. That
Would you?
no, it's way. No, I know it.
Mine's your way.
No, I'm just gonna have a water.
Hypocrisy.
I know, but everyone just took it like, would you?
Say something, but it's not.
Can you speak up?
Yeah, that's very sexy.
They're like all
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. If I can remind you of three things, please. If you have a cell phone, make sure that it is silenced and it does not come out during the presentations. Second thing, when it's time for questions, Nanaba's going to take questions from the panel first, and then we'll go to the audience if there is still time remaining. Third thing, we are streaming live, so please mind your P's and Q's verbally. Thank you so much. And here we have Nanaba Sam, missing, murdered, taken.
Thanks. So, yate shinabo yinishe, bilagan nishle, beshachani, beshache, kintachimi, bashashin, and tachimi, beshanella. Hi, my name is Nanaba. I am a Native American student, half Navajo, half white. So I'm just gonna start off with a little bit of background on my beliefs and culture. So basically, I mean, I'm sure we all know where the Navajo Reservation is because it's pretty close to here. But if you don't, it is located in between our four sacred mountains, which is Mount Blanca to the east, Mount Taylor to the south, San Francisco Peaks to the west, and Mount Hesperus to the north. And this is where my people believed that they resided originally, and that's where they came from. So one major part of my presentation is that the Navajo don't talk about bad things. So they don't, they don't like talking about things like death, murder, drugs, alcohol. It's believed that if you talk about it, then it could happen to you. So one thing, roles is like the Navajo culture is also pretty maternal. So women have just as equal rights as men do. And some, like they're able to like divorce their husbands, like back in the day they were. So that was a huge part of that. And then like our ceremonies and stuff, we have all of our ceremonies that my family still continues to do today, but I will go on to explain that a little bit more later. So a little bit more on the history. So we settled in the Four Corners area, just like I said before, once we first, like in the beginning, there were other cultural influences that came in. So like we had like settlers and like the Spaniards who came up, and back then they were able to adapt to that. So they went from, having bows and arrows to like adapting with guns and stuff like that. So that's like another part of my presentation is the adaptation and the changes that our culture went through, but the main basis of the culture still remain. So something a little bit on historical trauma that they've gone through. So I had an interview with a woman named Kim Moulton. She lives in Shiprock, but she works in Toyoak, and she actually did a presentation on sex trafficking on the Navajo Reservation. So whenever I attended that, she talked about how she believed that a lot of our problems relate back to historical trauma. So I figured that I should add that into my presentation. So one of the major bits of historical trauma is the Long Walk. So the Long Walk to Fort Sumner began in 1864, and basically the chief at the time, his name was Chief Manilito. The tribe was attacked, I guess you could say, by a man named Kit Carson. He burnt down their crops, they burnt down their homes, and they kind of forced them out of their homes, and then they kind of ran off for a while. And they were able to maintain themselves up until right before winter, but the people were dying, and so that's why Chief Manilito decided to surrender and give up. So with that, they were forced to walk 300 miles in the dead of winter and into a prison camp at Fort Sumner. So a little bit more of the boarding schools. I'm going to talk more about not present day boarding schools, but the boarding schools towards early in the 1900s. So the boarding schools, a lot of young Native American students after this event, the Long Walk, they were forced into boarding schools. So it was more of like a westernized schooling. So they weren't allowed to speak Navajo, they weren't allowed to talk about their culture, and they were basically just, that's where I believe the fall of culture began. So after the long walk, there was a treaty signed. It was the Treaty of 1868. The treaty was made. It was very simple. I believe it was a total of like 8 articles inside the treaty. I went through and I read it, and the first couple of articles that were stated was, I think the first 2 were talking about law, like just the 2 laws that were in there. That was it. So the laws were that if, I'm quoting this, so I don't want to put it anyway, but if a white man were to come in to the Navajo reservation and commit a crime, they would have to be sent back to the U.S. and they would deal with that. And then like vice versa. So like if a Native man were to go back, and then they would be charged with tribal laws. So after the treaty, they were considered a conquered sovereign nation. And while I was doing my research, the relationship between the federal and tribal governments is so fuzzy. Like there's not much research done on it. There's no like proof of like direct communication that I could find online, and I looked through different articles on other, like how other reservations communicate and stuff, and I still couldn't find anything. So the Navajo Nation today, in my interview with Kim, she said it's like driving through a developing country. So I hate to say it, but if you were to go through a Navajo reservation, which I'm sure some of you have, it's quite nice for it's just you look one way, you can see starving animals, you look the other, there's broken homes and old buildings and trash everywhere. So the Navajo Nation is 27,000 square miles in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. Within that whole area, there is 190 approximately-ish. 190 police officers that span that area, which has improved since 2016 when there was originally 150. So because of this, there's not exactly a 911, so there's not really any real emergency services that are provided. You can call the station and the nearest police officer could be 150 miles away. Some areas don't even have running water or electricity. I remember growing up, we would have to we would go down and see our family, and we'd have to get the water truck in the mornings just to get water and able to eat breakfast and then wash dishes afterwards. So I like to look at it as living in a developing country while you watch the rest of the world advance around you. So I'm going to get into my presentation, or my project. So my thesis was the lack of education and loss of culture both play a role in the continuous kidnapping and murder of indigenous women on the Navajo reservation. So people are going missing all the time, and while a lot of it goes unreported because of the lack of resources and the, just in an article that I read, it said that sometimes it's so bad that the dispatchers have to actually write down stuff with pen and paper instead of being able to do it over the radio and stuff like that. So the people who do go reported, there's about 2,500 missing since 1900, and that's just missing, not murdered, and it's only indigenous women, that number. Kidnapping, for me, it seems like kidnapping indigenous women is much easier because of the lack of police, the lack of reporting, and the downfall in my culture. So with this, all of the downfalls and a lot of it is lack of police, like I said before. There's a lot of domestic and sexual abuse that happens along with kidnapping and murder on the Navajo reservation. So, let me find this one. Okay, so trafficking. Like I said, it's easier to take the indigenous women because of the slow development and lack of police. In my interview with Kim, she talked about how traffickers are easily able to take advantage of indigenous women because of bribery, because of the amount of poverty that is on the Navajo reservation. In my sociology class that I took, I actually just found out that the Navajo, or just like Native people in general, lead in a poverty rate of 28.3%. Also, in my interview, I found out that a lot of people on the reservation don't just like take random people. They sell their own family, and people see it and still don't do anything about it. So this is Ashlyn Mike. She was taken on May 2nd of 2016 at around 4 o'clock. She was playing at a playground with her little brother Ian, and they were abducted by a man named Tom Begay. Hang on, just give me a second. So her older sister Grayson actually called her mother, who was in Tuba City, and she was put on hold at the Shiprock police for around 2 hours before she was actually able to make a missing persons report. Whenever their father came home, he tried getting a hold of Farmington Police, but because of the jurisdictional issues, Farmington Police couldn't do anything about it. So finally, at around 9 o'clock p.m. that night, which was 5 hours later, there was an actual push for an Amber Alert out, and of course, there wasn't really an Amber Alert on for the reservation itself at that time. So, in the dead of night, about 2:30 a.m., that is when everyone got the Amber Alert for Ashlyn Mike. Tom Begay, the person who abducted them, he was found praying for her return in the sweat lodge the next day. So laws of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is a lot of, it's basically kind of, I wouldn't say it pushes for no help from outside people. It's more the sovereign part of the treaty that makes jurisdiction an issue. So, the laws on the reservation they're very weak, in my opinion. In 2017, we actually finally got a sex trafficking law put into place. And basically, the law is that if you are caught selling another human being, your imprisonment will not exceed 365 days with a fine up to $5,000. And police don't really enforce the law. There's a lot of mistrust and economic disparity with a lot of the laws and jurisdiction on the reservation. Along with that, there's a lot of remote locations that are, like, there's so much land and a lot of it is so remote. People live in hogans out there, and yeah, so major crimes that are committed on the reservation that's whenever the federal government is stepping. So the U.S. Attorney's Office is supposed to bring in the charges for those things, but this one study that I found was that in 2010, U.S. Attorney's Office declined to prosecute 2/3 of sexual assault related cases because of lack of evidence on a lot of it. And then the homicide rates on the reservation. While I was doing my research, I really tried really hard to find more up-to-date stuff, but there just isn't very much research on it. So the closest thing I could find was in 2013, the Navajo Reservation led in homicide rates with 43 people that year, and that was above Chicago and New York, all the big places like that. So our Amber Alert, so the Amber Alert system was put into the United States in 1996 because a little girl, her name was Amber Hagerman. She went on a bike ride in Texas and didn't come home. And they found her body 5 days later in a river nearby her town. So after that, the United States kind of pushed for something that would help the children at least. And so in 2006, there was a grant given to the Navajo Nation. It's called Amber Alert in Indian Country. So there was $330,000 in federal grants that were given to just the Navajo Reservation. That's not all of them. It was just the Navajo Reservation alone. To set up and manage, it was going to get an Amber Alert set up just for the Navajo Reservation. So you wouldn't have to go through state police to get an Amber Alert set up. But it only lasted until 2009, about 3 years. The police chief of that time left, and no one was willing to take over the responsibility of doing the Amber Alert system. And I actually just found this out after I finished my senior paper, but April 15th of 2016, the Navajo Nation got an Amber Alert set up again. So there are several different ways that other people are trying to help with the downfall. So there's a man, his name is Chris Deschini. He ran for Navajo Nation president in 2014, but he was rejected because he's not fluent in Navajo. So instead of running the Navajo Nation, he decided to go a step above them, and he now works for a law firm that specializes in representing tribal governments. I don't necessarily agree with it because I don't think he should have went above it, but he did do what he could to help in the best way he could. So we also got a new police chief in 2016, and he brought our police officer count up from 150 to 190. So my first step in kind of pushing for a solution for this problem is education. Like I said in the beginning of my presentation, a lot of our culture, you're not supposed to talk about the bad things. And for me, it just seems like parents need to be educating their children about what is happening, especially on the reservation where it's so rural. Like they don't know what's going on, and there's not really a way to keep your children safe without that lack of police. So one other thing is that I'm noticing there is a lack of cultural teachings. I actually went to take my senior pictures recently in my traditional wear, and people were stopping me and asking me what was the occasion and why am I dressed like this, and it's like, Navajo? But it sucks seeing how, growing up, I just remember going through the reservation and seeing all of our traditional grandmas, and they talk to you in Navajo and all that stuff, and now you just don't see it anymore, and it sucks. So, my solution is definitely educating the children, just basically on that. I think that's going to be the first step to do, just because I'm not fluent in Navajo, I can't run for office, but I think higher education is going to be what is not only going to help with the reservation, but just in general in the world. So, yeah. So, this was my closing statement for my senior paper. The next generations are our only hope for change, not only on the reservation, but in the world. Empower your children so that they can better themselves and society through their education. I don't want to offend anyone in my culture, but we do need to be speaking about the bad. In the past, we've adapted to what has happened around us, and I think that needs to be happening more often now. So we need to embrace our culture and adapt, because without it, we're just going to lose it. This is a list of the missing Native American women. Just going to scroll through it. And here's my website. Any questions?
So one of the things that, and I don't understand the way the jurisdictions work between the state and federal authorities and the tribal jurisdictions, but do the tribal police have the authority to track for clues and track people off of the res, or can they only stay within the reservation?
I believe they do have the authority to do that, but I think once they get to where, so let's say that someone was tracking someone and they go into the United States, I think that's whenever they would have to come together to work, because they can't necessarily arrest someone on US soil.
And I know that in the past, there's been talk about, not a compromise, but an exchange basically between the tribal police and the, like, Farmington and Shiprock police, and being able to support one another, like if you have a fugitive situation. Have there been arrangements to allow that to come into place, or is that still kind of just on a per basis, understanding between maybe people who respect each other? Do you know?
I don't know, I didn't come across it in my research, just because it's not clear, the relationships, it's just, like, I think I found one website where it talked about the relationship between tribal and federal, and I couldn't find anything on state and tribal. Cause I know for Amber Alerts, the tribe would have to go through state to get that up before we had our own Amber Alert system, so I'm not sure.
Okay, because, and I don't mean to belittle this in any way, don't take this the wrong way, but I've been watching a TV series which is about a law enforcement officer in a county near a reservation, and most of the conflict there is between, not conflict between the two authorities, but that gray area that nobody really knows what they can do as far as the state authorities on the reservation and tribal authorities on, federal lands. And so it is quite, it's quite a black hole as far as we're, the guy was praying for her return. Was that after he already killed her? Was he hoping she'd come back to life? I'm confused by that anecdote.
Tom McGay actually, he admitted to kidnapping children, raping her, and then she, according to the stories that I researched, she had been really upset, and he actually left her there, and whenever he left her there, she was alive, is what his claims were.
I have a question. So the new police chief brought numbers from 150 to 190, which I mean, that's a pretty significant increase considering the funding. So what, do you know if more funding was given to hire those officers? Or
I'm pretty sure there wasn't.
So how do you do that? What techniques did you use to move those numbers?
I think a lot of I think people are realizing that there's a problem. I know that other people who are trying to help, like Chris and the new police chief, have come in and made great impact on what's been happening. And I know that a lot of the police officers who are trained, like, they have to have a contract for at least, I believe it's 2 years. They have to be there, and then they usually leave because the pay isn't good enough for them to maintain a life there.
So here's another perhaps indelicate question. That 150 to 190, are those dudes white?
I have no idea.
Did you do research concerning how much of the Navajo reservation is policed by other Navajos, or do you have numbers about how many Navajo members make up the police force? And do you think that would make a difference if we could somehow bolster our numbers with other people of the Navajo reservation?
I think it would be best if they did employ people from the Navajo reservation, just because of the high poverty rate that is there. But I do not know. That wasn't something that I really prioritized about researching for this. But I can research it for you.
One of the things that I think is so cool about the culture is the matriarchal equality. And watching this, I'm just wondering if you think that the I Need Respect for Women that was of the past has now been lost. Because that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yes.
Like that whole respect for women is no longer in place.
That is what I believe is happening, yes. I think that the culture from the difference in culture from the Navajo reservation in the United States, I think that there was just such a drastic difference. And then from watching from the Navajo reservation on the outside, watching it develop and progress, I think that a lot of that is like made people lose that part of them, like their culture, that respect and everything like that. Like I said, you don't see people traditionally dressed and then they ask you why you're dressed this way. So, yes.
A language question.
Yeah.
A couple couple of times in this, you really kind of visited on the importance of language. You mentioned that traditionally Navajo people won't speak about bad things. Just giving shape to it with words kind of opens a way of possibilities. You mentioned you personally believe the fall of the culture began with the boarding schools, where they tried to deliberately eradicate language from the people. And then you mentioned that someone who ran for a position in the tribe didn't get that position because they did not speak the language. You yourself mentioned you
I don't
don't
speak the
see
language.
yourself aspiring to a role of government or leadership because you don't speak the language. In a time when just getting a place that is suffering from deliberate inequities recognized and fixed, should people who know what's going on, who don't speak the language, start getting involved, or is language that important?
It's a hard question.
Good.
I think they do need help, whether they speak the language or are a part of the culture or not. I think it's come to the point where they just need help at this point.
I'll have you stop us. Yeah, Lance, real quick. I just want to piggyback on, I really think that you, as passionate as you are about this, you should look into possibly changing that impression that you have to be able to speak the language in order to help your people. Because I think that you've lost that and you need people like you.
Thank you.
I was wondering.
I know, I didn't want walking. I was so good. See, that's what, see, as soon as, Coach said that, I was like.
Right, I know.
Hey, the things are going in my brain, sorry. Like for some of the
Yes.
concerts, I just opened it
That's
up.
fine, that's okay.
It's easy to deal with that.
Okay, our next presentation is by Ariel Wright, Wage Gap.
Hello. Before I begin my presentation, I have a few questions. Mr. Tracy, what's your highest level of education?
2 bachelor's degrees from Fort Lewis College.
2 bachelor's degrees from Fort Lewis College. Ms. Weisenmaker, what's your highest level of education?
2 bachelors from Lamar University.
From Lamar University. Nice. Now, Mr. Tracy, I'm gonna give you $1. Okay? This is a bribe to win the honors diploma presentation. Big spender. All right, so that represents your salary. Now, Ms. Weisenmaker, say theoretically, you guys have the same degree. Now, whether it be in physics or political science, you guys can argue about that later. You probably won't win, Tracy. But I'm gonna give you 80 cents. Now, keep in mind, she has the same level of education as Tracy. This is the wage gap. Now, before I dive in, I want to give you guys some historical context. There have been several matriarchal societies. There are still some today, but they're rare. A popular one is the Mizzou culture. It's in China near Tibet. I included a picture. A famous pastime matriarchal society was the Vietnamese. Women there, they were leaders of clans, warriors. But these societies changed. There was a shift. In Native American cultures, such as the Cherokee, women there were viewed as political leaders. They could terminate marriages, which was a lot. They could control crops. But when colonists came to the Americas, they would not trade with the Native American women. It did not follow their beliefs. Similar with the African cultures. Colonizers would not trade with the women. So women were pushed and delegated to low-paying jobs and housework. The shift. I'm going to talk a little bit about religion. I'm not going to spew my beliefs, try to change your beliefs. I'm not bashing on religion. I grew up in a religious household. I'm simply going to discuss how the Christianity religion has formed the wage gap in a sense. So the Christian ideals presented the shift in equality of women as inferior to men. That's where sociologists coined the term benevolent sexism, which is where male gender role and identities are greater than women. Women are the weaker sex. So to test this, they did a Midwestern study where they gathered a group of women and they asked them about their religious views and their career aspirations. They noticed a trend. As a woman's level of egalitarianism, which is the belief of equality, equal opportunity, as that increased, their career aspirations increased, and motherly aspirations decreased. Vice versa, as a woman's level of complementarianism increased. Complementarianism is the belief that women are inferior to men but still have their jobs to uphold as well. The career aspirations decreased, motherly aspirations increased. I decided to pick a few quotes from the Bible just to prove this. And these don't include quotes that talk about how marriage is sacred and how a man should treat a woman. These are quotes talking about the status. These quotes I pulled from the New King James Version. The first one, 1 Corinthians 11:3. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man. Later on in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 8-9, it says, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. And in 1 Timothy 2, verse 11-14, it says, let the women learn in silence with all subjection. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. I'm not bashing on religion. I just want to reemphasize that. I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings. I'm just showing how this pertains to the wage gap. So let's talk about it. And today, there's this feminization of poverty, where women are 2/3 of all part-time workers earning $1 or less per day globally. In an attempt to abolish the wage act, JFK wrote the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which was that there would be no gender discrimination when it comes to pay. Some factors that are presently seen involved with the wage gap is gender discrimination. It is also job choices. Women, we are taught that we must have the feminine jobs, whether it be a teacher or a nurse, and that men must have the strong jobs, like a firefighter or a policeman. Those often pay more than teacher salaries. Another is family responsibilities. Women, we grow the children in our bodies. Afterwards, we need to breastfeed, nurture our children. We have those maternal responsibilities. And this plays into work hours. It's often designated that women will pick up their kids more often than men if their schedules work differently. Take them to band practice, drop them off at school in the morning. Another is negotiation. Studies have been shown that women are less likely to negotiate their salary compared to men. This graph I have from Pew Research, and this is a comparison between the gender wage gap and also the racial wage gap, which I think we need to pay attention to as well. I focus more on the gender wage gap, but if you look at these numbers, Hispanic women earning $12 around when white women are earning $17. I just think we need to call attention to that as well. And then here is just a graph talking about the differences from between men and women's earning when they have equal education. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So for example, Tracy, $1,300 with your bachelor's degree, and Ms. Weisenbaker around $950. Now let's talk about my project because that's the reason we're here. My thesis is that my project will propel a vulnerable population towards resources that will aid in the successful economic future. What does this mean? Well, my purpose is to help connect women to people in Montezuma County so that they have an opportunity to have instant and quick income so that they can propel themselves in life. Some specifics about my project. I wanted to meet with popular organizations in Montezuma County to see what they did when it comes to helping connect women with work. I first met with the Day Labor Center. I learned that it was rare for women to show up, and often employers seeking employees for day labor jobs would ask for men for strength purposes. So I met with Opinion Project, and they work more with the nuclear family, not really single mothers. It's more they deal with families as building foundations. And then I met with Renew. They deal with people that have been in abusive relationships, which are mostly women, but it happens with men as well. And their philosophy is that these women they deal with have been forced to do things their entire lives. And so they're not going to go force them to get jobs. If you guys have any questions about this later, please ask. I can definitely give you more specifics. So then I thought, how could I help women in Montezuma County by also stimulating the economy? Well, farming is a huge thing where we are. And so I decided, what if I could get connections so that women could become seasonal harvesters? And so I had a phone call with Kendra Brewer. She's the manager of the Southwest Farm Fresh Cooperative. She gave me the information for an initiative that was coming out of Fort Lewis College. But then I thought, I want to make this more general. That seems specific. So I decided to make a website and Facebook page that would help facilitate the connection between women and locals, nonprofits, organizations in Montezuma County. In order to advertise this, I distributed flyers around town, and I also contacted the Journal. Here's some examples of my flyers that have been around town. They're all over Montezuma County, so next time you're out and about, please look for them. And then here is, I'm going to show you guys. Ooh. Sorry guys, one moment, some technical difficulties. I did my decent. Thank you, Bree. Oh my goodness. All right, so here's a copy of my website. This is the home page. Mr. Sanders, I hope you're impressed with this. It took a lot of work, that's why I'm showing you guys. There's an About tab, which provides information concerning my project, my senior paper, the reason why I created the website. I included the link to my Facebook page. And then here's a tab on the wage gap, and it gives a summary and statistics about the wage gap. I also include an article about the U.S. women's soccer team. Please feel free to ask me about that. That's the perfect example of the wage gap in 2019. And then my next tab is a way for people to contact me, whether they are a business or a local, just to, if they need questions that they want to ask me, anything at all. All right, so a little wrap up of my project and my presentation. I created a website and Facebook page to make connections between women and employers. I've already had businesses in Montezuma County that have been contacting me. They've been liking the Facebook page, posting about job opportunities. I predict that they will pick up as well, knowing that summer is coming around. People will need yard work, maintenance, that sort of thing. And I hope that women will use this money to propel themselves in lives. A lot of these women haven't been given the opportunity to maybe further their education. And so they can use this money, save up, go to public community college, get a good paying job. And so the reason why I chose the wage gap, as you can tell, I'm a woman, so this is pretty personal. But I want to go into a male-dominated field. I want to major in mechanical engineering. I want to go off to med school. And I've been fortunate to be given the opportunities where I have the drive to do that. Women nowadays are told no, that they're not allowed to do that they shouldn't do that. They should be mothers. They should take care of their husbands, take care of the house. And so I just want to give women an opportunity, because if I don't, no one else will. Here's my works cited for pictures, sources. Now please bombard me with questions, the fun part. I'm a little nervous, guys. Yes,
Okay, first of all, I love your Facebook and your idea of connecting people with jobs, but I have to tell you, I can't imagine where you have grown up and where you have lived that anybody's been teaching you that you can't go into any job that you want. I have to say, going into mechanical engineering in the 70s, I have never met anything with that, so I'm baffled by that. I think that your example, Mr. Tracy and I, we get paid based on how long we work here, and so there are laws, and most companies have policies that your salary is set by that, whatever your race or your gender is. So I think that there's a lot more going on here rather than just the subjugation of women. And so I think that we've reached the point where we have more choices and people choose certain things. So how much did you look into the choices that women make versus the choices that men make?
Yeah, I didn't really look into that. I just kind of wanted to show how religion played into that, just the ideal of women being inferior. But when it comes to job choices, I believe that had an influence on job choices, where women, since they believe they're inferior, that would implicate that they shouldn't go for those high-paying jobs.
Do you feel inferior?
Sometimes, yes. I feel inferior. I feel like many women have felt inferior in the workplace. I don't know if you guys, even inferior out in public. The comments, the looks, that sort of thing. Mr. Tracy?
In your research, and you maybe didn't look into this, did you find any guilty businesses in our county that are practicing like wage gap paid?
So I thought about that. I researched that. I couldn't find any data. It was pretty challenging finding any statistics about the wage gap in Montezuma County. But it's a well-known fact that many businesses do that. And the way they manipulate that is they don't allow colleagues to discuss salary, which is understandable. But many women, there was a popular case, I don't remember her name, but it was versus Goodyear Tire Company. And she found out that she was being paid way less than her colleagues when she was actually doing more and at a higher level than them.
Like better.
Yeah, agreed. So I didn't look into Montezuma County, but I'm intrigued, especially just around here. I'd be intrigued to see those numbers.
So how did you get the 28% difference? Where does that number come from? What goes into calculating that?
The 28% difference in,
Well, that was the slide there, and you mentioned 20% difference earlier. So how do you see, where does the data come that says that women get paid less for the same work? Where does that come from?
which slide was that?
Well, there's the cartoon, but you mentioned this. You mentioned this 20-cent difference earlier in your talk. And so where does the data come that says that I get paid less than Mr. Tracy?
Nationally, they group together
What calculates that? How do they calculate that?
Bureau of Labor Statistics, major corporations like that, government policies. I could go and find the resource that I got my data from on the internet, a quick search. The place, yes. Ms. Mason?
Who teaches women to go into feminine jobs?
Who teaches women? I think women discover that on their own. We expand on the
Question,
question.
you talked about, like young girls growing up to believe that they're inferior. What process or what systems aid in that influential?
I definitely think it comes from the family. I mean, even from birth, when we have gender reveal parties, women are given pink, boys are given blue. We go to dance classes when we're younger. So I think it's just we've been set up so that women tend to be formed to become feminine, even though several women aren't. Several women, especially in here, were grown baling hay. That's what they did growing up. And so I just think it's about how they're raised.
So I want to speak to the CTE programs and how CTE tends to work. There are actually incentives provided for CTE programs to try and break those gender-heavy career pathways.
Mhm.
So to try and bring more women into the mechanical careers and things like that. So what would you suggest as means of trying to recruit people of the opposite gender for those career pathways? Because I know as a CTE teacher, that is something I am actively trying to do, but it's a challenge. What would you
It's a challenge for
recommend
sure.
that? Yeah.
I definitely think expanding on organizations like that. There are groups that offer for minorities going into like the workforce. For example, there's Women in Science and Engineering. That's a club, but I think it's difficult because it feels like people already have this preconceived notion that like, oh, I don't need to go into computer programming. That's what boys do. And so I think it's difficult to break down those barriers, especially when it's been inputted in our society, Western civilization. I think it's difficult, but I think it's awesome what the CTE is doing. Cecilia?
Do you think implementing all women colleges or schools would help kind of fix this? I mean, I don't think people really understand unless you're a woman how daunting it is to actually go into those fields and get that constant pushback. People just don't understand that. So do you think if you had all women's schools who had more of these fields in mechanics and mathematics and sciences, if that would be kind of a solution because you wouldn't be getting that constant pushback and you could just focus on actually learning these to get into the job force?
Yeah, I think they're a great idea, and I think that's based on choice. I like a little competition, so maybe going to an all-girls school I wouldn't prefer because I want to show how I can be equal to a man. But the ideas, and they're popular all over boarding school, especially on the East Coast. Not very popular out here, but I definitely think that could help expand a women's horizon for sure.
When you went and when you applied for School of Mines, did the people at the School of Mines try to talk you out of School of Mines because you're a woman?
No, they encourage
Here
it.
in Cortez, we have previous girls with me that went to school of mines and engineering, so
Mhm.
where are we getting this pushback? Because I have to say, I think it's a legend, personally. And I think that we perpetuate this legend by talking about it all the time. My experience in both the workplaces in mechanical engineering and in college is that they were excited as all get out that I showed up.
Yeah.
Because finally there's a girl in my class.
Agreed.
And so, I think that we are telling girls that people are gonna be against you when there's really no one against you. And that bothers me.
Yeah, agreed. No, but there's organizations, like I said, like WISM, that's the acronym for it, Women in Science and Engineering majors. But I don't know, I guess my whole thing is they actually encourage women, especially at mine, since the ratio to men to women is 3-1. And that's because women are a minority, because engineering is typically a more masculine degree. Like you said, you were like one of the first women to be in classes with a group of men, and they were excited to see that. And so I guess it just comes from, like I said, like the ideals that women are inferior, and so you being like the first one is epic. I just think that like, that's just what I'm trying to do, is tell women that they can go and do that thing. They don't have to be delegated to housework or to be mothers. They can go and be the breadwinner.
So I can see in 1980 that the pay ratio between men and women was 60.2, and in 2019 it's over 80%. So and I think that kind of the research would say that supports what Susan's saying, is we're ushering out in new groups, we're making progress too.
Oh, agreed. Yes, I never said differently. I definitely think there's been a drastic change. And that's what's exciting to look forward to, is the fact that we're going towards a change where it's equal. And so, yeah, it used to be way different back there.
What's the proposal around?
To help women in Montezuma County who were never allowed or given the opportunity so that they can go there.
But we are allowed, we've been making progress for the last 30 years.
But is that national?
It's right on the AAWS.
Nice.
Mr. Wayman?
Wait, we're gonna stay on panel for the last one.
Tracy?
Progress has been happening before we had the civil rights movement. Some folks just realized it wasn't fast enough.
Yeah.
In the 70s, there was this thing called an Equal Rights Amendment, and it died. Do you think we need an Equal Rights Amendment? And if so, why hasn't there been much of an aggressive push for one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is. Why hasn't there been one push for one? I don't know. I don't know the specifics about that. I'd have to look into that and see how it died.
I'll help you out with this question. Who would be pushing? Who would be pushing for that initiative to happen?
Hopefully minorities, women.
Are those the groups that make those types of policies currently?
No. No, it's usually white men.
Oh, so maybe that's why it hasn't happened yet.
Maybe that's why it hasn't happened, because, yeah, we're not quite in charge. Yes,
Could you talk about the U.S. soccer team case? Because I think it's very important
yes,
in the
okay.
context.
Yes, actually, this is very interesting. So, U.S. women's soccer team won their third World Cup back in 2016. But they were being paid proportionately less than their male associates. And the male team wasn't doing as good. They made it to the 16th round of the World Cup. For each game that the women won, they'd get $1,300. When they lose, they wouldn't get paid anything. The men, each game they won, they'd get paid $17,000, and each game they lost, they'd get paid $10,000. And the women were actually winning the World Cup, and were number one, and are still number one today. And so just recently, they filed a lawsuit against the United States because of that wage discrimination. Mr. Sanders?
You mentioned several times about women being told that they're inferior, and that being a mother and things like that are inferior sort of jobs. My wife talks about several times during her growing up when she was told because she chose to be a mother from a young age, she wanted to be a mother, she wanted to raise a family. She was told that she was not setting her sights high enough, that she was given the inferiority message by other women.
Yes.
Because of a choice that she made to be a mother.
Mhm.
My argument is that being a parent is probably the most important job out there.
Agreed,
And
and hardest.
people in the job market saying otherwise, are really to blame for those sort of messages.
Yeah.
So I would express concern over, treating, parenting as an inferior sort of message. That just wouldn't make it very nice.
Piggyback on that, because some of the stuff I've experienced, and I do think they're starting to do that, is I think men get looked down upon if they want to be stay-at-home dads.
Yeah, agreed.
And also businesses don't give men equal time off as they do moms.
Or
when they
any.
have a new child.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, agreed.
Boeing just this year gave their male employees the same time off as the female employees, which I was grateful for.
Yeah, which I think that's really cool too, the movement, and just not, and that's just kind of where I go into play, where like the men, especially had a household where the people believe that they shouldn't get that time off when they should. And definitely, I think maternal, paternal, it's how the world goes around. I mean, they're very important. The family is very important. I agree.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it.
If you have any other questions,
Oh, no, don't become fathers because it might affect your career.
No, yeah, I know.
No one ever told me
My
that.
aunt had to go back to the bit when my cousin was 3 months old. It was like that or get fired, and she was a single mother. Like, all of that. But like, it's not just the wage. Yeah, I can work. I have to and I have to be likable enough, and I also have to work hard enough as milking and raising.
I got what?
Yes, there's so.
Or your boss. Yes, but you are helpful.
And then Rachel, they like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'll be walking around the store and I will and like grab and I smile. I so nice. You make sure work harder and smile while you do it. And it's like, I've been here for 8 He Googled it. He Googled it and it's in the reviews. Like this little style is pretending like he's yeah. He's complicated so hard for something. Oh, maybe. One day I'm just gonna your mother was right. Like if he literally ran this better knowing how many are left today? I don't know. So we get to stay here for Don't shake his hand. I know so many people who said their teens
who are not teachers. And they're just like, oh, well, it's their own fault. They did that to me. Super bad. That's how hard, like, it's our
It's so cunning.
completely reworks your brain.
Yeah, I got
After you go through it, it takes about 12 hours to start tuning your brain. And so after that, you're already like starting to be my mom was terrified.
I always read my map or read my maps again.
And it's like
More hot.
I wanted her to. I love fried chicken That's literally the pushback. They were just in each other down like, we don't believe you.
I too.
So much
It's just. That's what you're looking at.
It doesn't matter. He said,
and it's the only, it's like literally just those people terrible.
it's not a situation because I was on the verge of passing out. They were very expensive. I do. To be honest, so anyways, I think but then
Okay, that's the thing. If I went up there, I would literally just start yelling because they like make me mad.
So can we talk about between the soccer players and the teachers?
That's why they literally are pushing with my for the
that's what we're saying.
So are we all. But didn't get to keep the dollar, so it kind of bothers me. Even with the bar there, it's partially buffer.
it's loading, but when it's loading slowly, that kind of bugs you. That's probably a premise. It's not loading, it's just sitting there.
It's turned on.
Like glued already. It's why it's the best. Yeah, nice.
She's like,
That tech here back there, that one that we have in the front
and she's like, here to like, kind of like,
and I have mixed feelings about it.
and like,
They function well, and I'm tired of that.
happening, and they're like, like the in the case about
It's on YouTube.
she was like, everyone else was
Yes,
like,
classes.
it was like Trump's a racist,
There's enough when that
here's the proof, here's all of the proof, and they're like, well, it's not personal.
I can give you the link for today. We'll broadcast it. Like they never really
I was seeing because of the internet, I've seen the first lady.
I think that what they should do for the scholarship is not having the presentation was
The porn stars were like, what a chaotic mess.
imagine all these people in their fancy
If I were to tell you that a porn star is the first lady, you wouldn't believe it. That's not the reality. Yeah, he was so bad, especially when the guys think that his hotel is that we have
They're going to start going through the monies that are
we funded $5 million more to buy. And there's like, kids sold off to sex, like, literally no one's doing anything. And now, whenever I see a Make America Great Again, I have a great that builds up with this view. And I'm just like,
that's in the classroom.
the biggest picture in the I just so much fun. I didn't want that and she's like, nice, smile, really, so look you in the eyes and don't say anything about it. So I'll just be up there and they'll come down and go,
The shirts are 25.
I have to remember these presentations where they say something that's against it, and they're not attacking me. At first, I'm about extracurriculars, I was getting really heated. So I would happily throw away the other half of it to just do extracurriculars. But I've done community theater.
Were you impressed with the
I was not quite sure what some of the proposals would do. I was impressed that she was making efforts to try and do something. So often people just complain that she's actually making efforts. I do want to know.
it's surprising to like what they find out.
You should always talk about it.
Well, he's bringing us in here. I don't know if we're supposed to like go talk about it and then setting it all on fire. In here. I'm gonna set it a firecracker.
I'm really excited for Ryan. It's gonna be some all information on the internet is true. I was just thinking if you went up there and just said,
I put it on the internet, so it has to be true.
Yeah, we like having these. I literally had an entire monologue yesterday.
Can we go ahead and go so someone can say this?
I'm gonna go home and watch it. I had to go through deep tissue therapy. The entire time she's like, "You're so toxic. All of these things are toxic," and she'd be like, and now I have to go I got it right, and it's still just like really sore. But whenever she touched my feet, it was like, they were getting mad at my hair. So I didn't because I
usually your phone dies. Especially when we make a this summer, I just get hired full time because they just hire me. Like it's stuff they don't even like fully realize. It's not something that goes through their head. But that means so much. That's why I'm like, but I also don't want to try. I know. That's how I know. Yeah, I am more thinking. It's not even like anybody did that. So I was big that's okay. I was keeping it.
I was like a reliable source.
Once again, I'm going to go through the three things that we want to make sure of before we get started. If you have a cell phone, please turn it off, silence it, something so that it will not interrupt, and please keep it in your pocket away. Second thing, the panel will get to ask questions first. And if there's more time, then it will be opened up to the audience. Third thing, we are streaming live, and so please mind your P's and Q's early. So let's go ahead and move on to Ms. Taylor Kaminsky and Apple a Day.
Okay, so I would like to start by asking, by show of hands, how many of you have a cell phone? Also. Okay, I would also like you guys to think about when you got your cell phone and where it is at most times. So I'm Taylor Kaminsky, and I'm going to introduce the risks radiation from cell phones can present in a child's brain. Our society heavily relies on cell phones for communication, gathering information, and entertainment, and so much more. The average person spends at least 3.5 hours daily on their phone, and 3 out of every 4 people get their cell phone by the age of 12. Each time we send a text or make a call, data is converted into electric signals that are packed into radio waves to send to cell towers, and then they are transmitted to the recipient. These radio waves move at 186,000 miles per second, helping this process happen in little to no time at all. Waves are determined by the wavelength and frequency that they have. Cell phones operate at 450 megahertz to 2,700 megahertz. Radio frequency radiation is the energy emitted from radio waves. Energy is absorbed by the cells in our bodies, especially at close proximity. The specific absorption rate is how much energy each kilogram of tissue absorbs in our, is the amount of energy each kilogram of tissue absorbs. The FCC has determined that 1.6 watts per kilogram of tissue is safe to use, So energy absorbed at 1.6 watts per kilogram is safe to use. When energy is absorbed at high levels, it can create heat shock proteins that can cause a leak in the blood-brain barrier. When mice were exposed to frequencies of 835 megahertz, they began to show extreme learning deficiencies and leading to a precancerous stage when energy was absorbed at 1.5 watts per kilogram of tissue. As a cell phone is pressed against your head while making a phone call, a rise in glucose consumption occurs. All cells rely on glucose to produce energy for the body. This includes cancer cells. So essentially a rise in glucose can increase, so a rise in glucose can help the cancer cells to thrive instead of helping them to die off. Okay, so children have thinner skulls than adults, and they have a higher water and ion content. Thinner skulls make it easier for radiation to penetrate through the brain. And water and ion are both conductors of these waves. Because of these factors, radiation can penetrate as far as the pituitary gland, which is responsible for child development and a lot of learning development. So if the pituitary gland is harmed, it can create major learning deficiencies and essentially affects how development functions are carried out. A child's brain has the ability to absorb twice the amount of radiation than that of an adult. So if an adult's brain absorbs 1.6 watts per kilogram, then a 10-year-old can absorb approximately 3.6, or it can absorb energy at approximately 3.6 watts per kilogram, and a 5-year-old at 5.3 watts per kilogram. Okay, so this is basically just a diagram showing how far the radiation can penetrate. I know it's a little blurry, but this one's for a 5-year-old, this one's a 10-year-old, and that one's an adult. So as you can see, that the 10-year-old is about absorbs about 2 times as much as the adult, and the 5-year-old absorbs almost 4 times the adult. Okay, so even though harm was not seen immediately after tests were performed, brain tumors can occur or can take up to 10 to 15 years to form. And it can take even longer for symptoms to show. Likewise, the harm of cigarettes weren't seen until years later, and brain tumors caused by Hiroshima weren't seen until 40 years later. At this rate, a 10-year-old wouldn't gain a fully developed brain tumor until their mid-20s. And it would take years later for them to be diagnosed, possibly. Okay, so even though cell phones haven't been popular long enough for scientists to fully test their risks that they can put on a child, we've already seen a huge increase in it's glioblastoma multiforme as smartphones became more popular, especially among children. So that one is this one, the GBM. So here in Cortez, there are several areas where there is little to no cell service, which increases the harm as cell phones have to work harder, and they create more energy. Cell phones portray a bigger threat in towns like ours rather than big cities because the cell towers are further apart. Overall, the responsibility must be on the company because they're the ones that made their product, so they should be the ones to fix it. But and although that they don't have complete proof that it forms a brain tumor in children because it's not because they haven't been around long enough. Technology companies should still be working on improving their products just in case. Especially because we're always trying to make a newer, better product, instead of taking a look and seeing what the products already have caused. Brain tumors can cost more than $200,000 to treat, and brain surgery is just extremely risky. As our technological world advances rapidly, everyone wants to create the next best thing. But I think we need to take a step back and see what we've already created and how that can affect the world around us. Because in order to stay safer while using phones, people can potentially use headphones, Bluetooth, or speakerphone to keep the phone away from the head. Sorry. Although the burden must be on the companies, I think parents and others should be informed about the risks and harms that cell phones can cause, especially to keep our younger generation safer. And part of that, sorry. Scientists haven't found clear data that perhaps because most of their research is relying on adults. If they did the research more on children and smaller brains, basically, then they could potentially see a different result. I'm proposing that scientists conduct more studies on the effect cell phones have on children, while technology companies begin improving their products for the betterment of society and our resources.
Okay, I think this is pretty funny, actually, because back in the day when microwaves first came out, we were told that they would cause cancer and that you shouldn't look in the microwave to watch a food cook because you're getting cooked at the same time. Did you look at in your data, did it show any correlation between the difference between now our smartphones and the old flip phones where you actually held them up to your head? So to me, that's the difference between watching your food cook in the microwave rather than outside.
Yes, I did. Well, I kind of did. The cell phones and mobile phones they basically work in the same way, whereas landlines, they go through electric cables instead, but both mobile phones and smartphones can cause the same thing.
No, I mean, like, did you see any difference between like the flip phones where you used to have to hold them up to your head? And like the smartphones that most people talk on the speaker, nobody can, I don't want to see you be holding it up to your, did you see any data on that, the difference between those?
So basically, if you're holding it up to your head for a long amount of time, even just the mobile flip phones, it can cause more damage than just holding it out on speakerphone. Basically, so the smartphones that if you were to hold it out in front of you, then it wouldn't cause as much damage.
So what was GBM? I'm sorry.
GBM, oh, sorry, that one was the
is that
glioblastoma.
Is that like a brain tumor? I mean,
yeah, sorry about that.
Name, but I don't know what that
yeah, it's just a type of brain tumor.
So with the advent of things like other types of communication on smartphones, like texting and Snapchat, and all those things, students do that old people don't, we just call on
yeah.
Do you have any data about how conversation or actually holding a cell phone to your head has decreased because of those things, or is that something?
I still haven't seen any change, even though a lot of us younger generation has our texts and Snapchats and stuff. But I think that it's better than calling. I mean, I personally think that talking to someone on the phone is better than texting because you're getting the you're actually talking about things and not just.
But as far as data goes, did you find are calls is the ratio of a person-to-person call decreasing with the advent of other types of apps which circumvent that?
I didn't look into that specific data, but I'm pretty sure that they would be decreasing.
So,
Go ahead.
when people started having early phobias about electromagnetic fields and power lines, some studies just looked at neighborhoods that had the big cables going through them and giant towers, and they said, hey, there does appear to be statistically higher rates of some cancers through these giant power line corridors. Have any studies looked at neighborhoods around cell phone towers?
A couple of them have, and they have found that they increase the cancer risk, definitely, especially if you're in a close proximity to a cell tower. But also, we can't eliminate every single electromagnetic wave that are around us all the time.
So that's actually a good bounce off point for me. And in terms of radio waves, most of the technologies that we use involve radio waves.
Yes.
Wi-Fi, you mentioned using Bluetooth. Well, that's no good because Bluetooth is radio waves
Yeah.
too. You're putting that in your ear. Not to mention the radio that you listen to in your car.
Yeah.
So which has been around forever. Is there a connection between, in your research, have you found any connection between how close something has to be to you and just, if every person in the room has a cell phone and every person in the room has it on, there's a lot of radio waves in this room. Are we all cooking our brains?
Essentially, kind of, but it's not going to do as much damage because it's not as close to your head. So basically, it has to penetrate through a lot of tissue, basically. And so the reason that scientists haven't found a lot by doing their research on adults is because the tissue that a radio wave has to go through is more than a child. So if a child gets a cell phone by the age of 10, and they're using it basically their whole life, they are going to have a definite increase of cancer as opposed to an adult.
So do you know why the microwaves or the radio waves that we're looking at here, the frequencies are much lower than visible light? Why are those creating cancers rather more so than just being out in the sun? Because it's a higher frequency.
If you're outside for a very long time and you get sunburns all the time, the sun can still cause cancer. But I'm not really sure about the visible light. I couldn't find a whole lot of data about cancer that is caused by waves. It's just really new.
So are there studies currently being conducted about this?
Yeah, a lot of a lot of scientists have been attempting to perform studies, but it's also really difficult because we can't directly test it. So it's basically just I ask you how long you've been using a cell phone, and so it's basically just self-reported studies.
So then, in reference to your thesis, run by me one more time again what exactly you're proposing that's already being done.
I think that they should just continue it basically, and that they should continue their research. But I also think that technology companies should already be starting or trying to improve their technology instead of just using the same wave or same frequencies or same sources, and attempt basically just looking into a new wave.
So I was just researching on the American Cancer Society, they said they gave it to rats for 2 years at higher rates than cell phones and found no difference in the control groups except for the male rats actually lived longer.
I wonder what they were doing on their cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
The studies that I found actually didn't say quite that. They said that the male rats that were exposed to the same frequencies as a cell phone were in a precancerous stage. So
Do you know how long they were exposed?
I'm pretty sure it was 2 years as well.
So you can't send yourself up for more than 2 years at a time.
I think it's for adults it's a little different. I think it's like 10.
And so,
Of course.
So it's, in large part, it's a world we live in, it's ruled by money. So do you think it's actually feasible that we can get tech companies to work by their moral code of ethics and stop thinking about what's going to sell and start thinking about what's going to give our child's brains cancer? And do you think those regulations should come from the tech companies or from governments or where other resources?
I agree with you that we're definitely run by money, and that if we left it up to the cell phone companies, nothing would change. So I think that we would have to go to a government basically. And by looking at some studies, people that work for cell phone companies rarely let their children have cell phones because of the dangers that they can cause.
Would us teenagers be more at risk because we have less tissue preventing the radiation from coming through, and we're also having our cell phones 2 inches away from our face at all times?
I think so, yes, especially because cell phones started to become popular when we were little, and so essentially yes, because we've had cell phones for longer, and we have less tissue in our brains. So yeah, basically.
Did you look at any studies relating to if those frequencies cause cancer tissue in hands or other parts of the body than the brain?
I found one study, but I wasn't able to back it up very well, that there was a change in tissue in the hands. But I only found one study, so.
So is it likely that just keeping our cell phones in our pockets and in our pants is also exposing us to other kinds of cancers, such as people that will keep it in like their upper chest pockets? Are they likely to develop breast cancer, or is it most just in the brain?
I didn't quite look into that, but I know that there have been studies on it, and it is how it's possible, yeah. Amy?
Do you know what the minimum known wavelength for radiation that causes cancer is now?
I do not. I couldn't find it. I attempted several times.
Because right now it's in the UV range, and there's a very big difference between UV and radio waves. Also, the start of cancer, did you look up the chemistry of how radiation actually causes cancer?
It has to do with how it is absorbed by tissue. I'm pretty sure.
And how does the tissue absorb?
Sorry, what was that?
How does the tissue absorb radiation?
That part is a little confusing to me. I mean, I'm in high school physics.
Okay.
You're only, or is it like, yeah. I feel like, I understand how hard it is to be a teacher, like a teacher, that's what it is. I might have felt it with love joke. I was only offended. She's like, I wasn't sure. Shut up. I respect them so much. I also
Like visible,
I think there's two more, right? Yes. I keep forgetting to get them.
This is
I hear questions. I'm sorry, no, I love it. You have landed. I love it. You abandoned
Presentation where her entire like music in the background. I like she was up there trying to be like, yeah, guys, and I was literally so not. I would see a lot of people on that work. He doesn't have to know how he is. The crowd is I am afraid of this.
Yes.
How do you react to this work? Because I don't like people laugh at that.
Is that how you I need to learn back. No, I did see her. I saw her. She plans to she's so right. No, and she called me on time with Mrs. Kelly. Well, and I said, what are you going to do? At first she said, we had a hard time serving our kids. No, I remember. But thank God. So if I got to we were going to mark out. I'm giving her that Sunday. Well, no, she was going to but she's been and I said, listen, I don't stress on her. I mean, they're not easy to yes, so she's mumbling. But she might be putting her okay, I'll take it down. So, yeah, this is, she's got one more. Seven for kids. She got that. So she's so I'm gonna honor what she said. Yeah, that's good. She says that's credit online senior class. Senior. She said, no, I know that. I said, okay, well, I'm not
She dressed up
and said, if you don't look, I don't know what you are. She looks so good and makes all the stuff.
I like them. I think I have.
Our next presenter is Ryan Catrone, the spread of misinformation on the internet.
Okay, so obviously, turn the mic on. Okay, oh, no, it's on now? Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, my project is on the spread of misinformation on the internet. Here we go. Okay, so in 2018, 89% of adults in the US use the internet. This counts for adults who have a computer or a smartphone in their home or just have regular access to the internet, not just walk to the library and get it. So this is regular access. These people use the internet, have access to social media, research, news. They can use it for work. Basically, all information that humanity has access to, everything that we've learned, our history from the first humans to the present is on the internet. Despite this, assuming there are 50 people in this room, there are 3 of you who think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. And there's one person in the room who thinks that the earth is flat, who firmly believes the earth is flat, and will argue with me and will argue with you about it.
It is.
In fact, only 66% of millennials firmly believe the earth is round. The other 32 are in doubt. They're not quite sure. Despite 89% of adults in the US having access to all information that humanity has ever known. How does misinformation get around the internet? Obviously, there's a lot. People can say whatever they want on the internet. One very, very big contributor to this is Russian trolls. They're bot accounts run by Russians, mainly using Twitter and Facebook, and their only purpose is to spread misinformation, to divide Americans, to make us fight, to make us get scared about things. They send millions and millions of tweets, and they just basically talk about whatever will piss us off. So we talk about Syria, we'll talk about vaccines, they talk about politics, and they're just trying to spread fear, and they're just trying to segregate us, to make us angry at each other and yell. To get an idea of the effect that Russian trolls have on Americans, consider that Russians put on social media, they organized a white people rally, and people went to it. So they organized it in Russia, people saw it, and they went to it, and it was a big deal. So that gives you an idea of how influential these tweets that you normally wouldn't think affect anyone, and how influential they actually are. Why is this a problem? Why is it a problem that the three of us who think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows and there's one person in here who thinks the earth is flat? Well, misinformation on the internet can be physically dangerous to people. Does anyone in here watch Dr. Phil?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm sure you guys have seen the episode on Jilly Juice. What Jilly Juice is it's a mysterious green substance that this lady says can cure anything. So it can cure autism, is what she said. It can cure autism, it can cure Down syndrome, including the facial deformities. It can make people smarter, it just makes you healthier, it does everything. Oh, it regrows limbs. Yeah. And so it's one of those things, you wouldn't think people buy it, but then there are a bunch of people in Dr. Phil mad that they bought it and they got sick when they drank the mysterious green liquid. So naturally some people bought it and wanted to analyze it, see what it is, and it was just like cabbage and salt. That was it. Why is this a problem? Why is it a problem that people will buy this? Well, it shows us that there are people in America who aren't independent thinkers and they aren't critical thinkers. These people aren't contributing to society to the fullest of their potential because they're not thinking, they're not doing research, and they're not doubting what they're being fed by the internet. So the research goal for my project was to find a common link in who is affected by misinformation, as in a gender, a political affiliation, a general age, and then it was also to determine the public's opinion on the severity of misinformation on the internet. So how bad the people who take my survey perceive misinformation. I found absolutely no correlation with any demographic group and how bad they're affected by misinformation on the internet. And in fact, everyone who uses the internet is affected pretty equally. So this is, obviously, you believe fake news stories are causing significant confusion. I had about 50 people take this. I don't know why only 48 answered this question. One person said no, 2 said maybe, and the rest said yes. Keep in mind that the age group for my survey was 14 to 65. And I also tried to keep it out of the school. So it was people around the country, in and out of America. So mainly America and England were people who took this. That's a huge majority of people who think this, obviously. So how skeptical? I also asked people how skeptical they are from information from the primary source of news. 1 is the least skeptical, 5 is very skeptical. Obviously, most people are not very skeptical of the primary news source. Keep this in mind. How skeptical are you of information from a news source that you've never used before? Again, 1 is not skeptical at all, 5 is very skeptical. Most people are extremely skeptical of news that they get from a source they've never used before. Keep this in mind too. So now we're going to talk about where people primarily get the news from. I made a mistake when I was doing my survey by letting people put in their own answers, so that's what this is. The 2 biggest ones were social media and online news sites like the New York Times and Washington Post. When you consider that people trust their primary source of news and they don't trust other ones, you realize that they're not likely to expand their horizons and when they're getting news from. And so they get their news from the same company and the same writers, and that's all the information they're getting. The same political views, views on life, just the same opinion, and that's their own thing that they're being fed. Also, social media is just really bad at you, a bad place to get news from because they make money from ads. And so the more that they can get you to click on something ridiculous, the more money they'll make. So guys, in Snapchat, when you click on a story that you think is cool, and then it has like, this is Mary, she's 5, you click on the next button, and then there's a bunch of ads everywhere, and she goes, Mary is 5, and she goes to school, and you click on it again, and you see the ads. The purpose of doing that is so they can make more money. And they sell you the story that may or may not be true, and they make a bunch of money off of it, and then you just see the headline and you don't really know what's going on. This is more from my survey, and this is how I gauged how bad misinformation on the internet generally is. So this is if they'd ever believed a fake news story and like found out that it was fake. The blue is yes, yellow is maybe. So a huge majority have definitely or probably maybe been affected believing a fake news story. Now this other one is people have shared a fake news story, whether on purpose or by accident. I put on purpose or by accident just so I could keep track of all of the fake news stories that are spreading, not just ones that people do by accident, just to give me an idea. And 57% of people said no. I think that this is false though, considering that such a huge majority of people either have believed a fake news story before and didn't realize it till later, or could have. So 57% is probably a really big estimate of this number. So what are some of my solutions? Well, it's basically just teach people how to think. We should increase the number of independent research projects in school. And what I mean by that is research projects that students get to choose the topic of. So like if a student wants to do a research topic of why the earth is flat, then they could do that. Not necessarily like giving a big presentation, but something like our senior papers. We do research projects in school, so we did one for Tuschinski if you're in biology. But I'm talking more general than that, where we don't just do a biology project, we do a whatever we want. We should give students at the high school access to scholarly databases. Everyone I know, your teachers always tell you, don't click on the first result, don't use Wikipedia. But other than that, we don't really know if what we're using to get our research is legit or not. So if we had access to scholarly databases, other than like the 5 kids from Mason's class, we could, A, be much more sure of information that we're using for our research projects, and B, learn where we should be getting our research from, in part. My third thing is we should start weaning high school students off of the middleman interpreters. I haven't really found anything about this in my research, but the middleman interpreters are what I call, when you read on like the Washington Post or the New York Times, someone who writes an article about a research thing that went on. You are taking their interpretation of the research. So when you read it, you're reading what they decide are most important about the project. You're reading their interpretation of the data and whatever they decide to give to you. And this may not be what the scientists wanted to say. It may not be the scientist's message. And it could be a skewed message of the whole study. So we should, by giving students access to scholarly databases and encouraging them to use them, we would wean students off the middleman interpreters. If we did this though, we would have to educate kids on how to get through the jargon of serious academic articles. I'm not saying that we should just make freshmen jump into a scholarly article about how certain airways affect cardiac arrests and the long-term effect of those. But we can't just go to the second result and Google anymore. It's not good, and then we get to college and we don't know what we're doing.
Is unnecessary.
Oh, they're little numbers. I forgot to tell you guys. I put little numbers to the questions. If you didn't see them, it doesn't matter.
There's a saying, give the people what they want. You mentioned social media is a bad place to go for news because it's ad-driven and what people are clicking on is what gets spread the most. In other words, we're getting exactly what we want. Why do you think misinformation is so much more popular and attractive than this thing we call the truth?
It's remarkable. Oftentimes, there are Republican satire accounts on social media, and the guy who runs them just puts total BS, 100% not true. And then in the comments, it's people who believe it. And so there's a picture of Donald Trump, and then he just arbitrarily circled two women behind him, and it was like Hillary Clinton and another, he said it was Hillary Clinton and another Republican, saying that they're about to slap him or something. Obviously, this has never happened. But there are people in the comments who believe it, mostly older Republicans. But it's remarkable to those people. When they see something like that, it makes them angry. Or maybe it's something funny, or maybe it's something that they just can't believe. And that most of the time it's because it's not true. So that kind of attention is what they are trying to get to bring you to click on ads. And then they don't make it clear that it's satire. They don't make it clear that it's a joke. And so it's up to the people who are on social media to figure out whether it's real or not. And oftentimes they don't, because they're not really put in the research to back up those claims.
All right, so you spoke of Amazon and Google and other obviously profitable corporations using this phenomenon to their advantage to profit. What did your research uncover about those corporations being the same corporations that are actually coming up with truthful news sources? And how did that inform your research?
Obviously Americans can't be too dumb. We have to be smart enough to get through life and help the companies make money. But they don't want to make us so smart that we realize what's going on. So there's a balance between keeping us informed and them just making money. And I didn't do specific research on that, but there you go.
Fred, have you looked at the different types of misinformation that appears? In other words, it seems to me there's a difference between, say, some of the misinformation, which basically is destructive in the sense that it can cause hate among different races, religions, whatever, and kind of misinformation, which is sort of silly.
So the two that I've come across mainly are the Russian bots, which are meant to cause discourse, and misinformation that is for people to make money, like the Joey Juice or the Steven Snapchat stories. Obviously, there's sub categories going under those, but from my research, those are the two main ones that I've encountered.
Okay, so do you think that there should be some sort of oversight on what gets put on the internet? I mean, back in the day when you had print news, the whole purpose of the editors and of any sort of print was to verify that the stories were correct. And when we had news on TV, I don't remember in my youth ever thinking that the news story was wrong. And so do you think we should have oversight? Who should have that oversight, and how do you police it?
Well, having someone policing over the internet is not realistic. There's so many people contributing to what's happening.
Should they be allowed to?
Well, sure. People should be able to post whatever they want on the internet, but people should also be smart and figure out what's real and not real. Not what's not real. People posting deliberate misinformation on the internet is definitely a problem, but it's not one that we can fix because it's deliberate and they have a purpose behind it. The best way to fix it probably is to teach people, the consumers, how to avoid it and recognize it.
So we're talking about these two different types of information that has been called silly and information that's been called really dangerous. And you mentioned these Russian trolls. Did you research and cover anything about America doing this, either through the internet or other sources of propaganda?
No, but I'm sure.
Just a question, going back to like your problem solving for the research projects. Would you consider that instead of, I mean, I think it's great to teach them through research projects how to weed through what is good information and bad information, but how about going back to like old fashioned, like you have to have free sources that are non-internet sources? I mean, would that be a way to teach students how to have more common sense and be able to look at stuff on the internet and be like, I don't think that sounds feasible?
We already implemented that in a lot of classes where we do papers. And so I think that we should keep that and then give students access to scholarly databases where they can have access to legit information. Yes?
On the note of scholarly databases, did you look up the cost of a subscription
No.
to them?
Yeah, they're very expensive.
So, wonder too, having taught freshmen in these research projects, most times if you give them the option of a scholarly database and Wikipedia, probably 9.99 times out of 10, which I know is not statistically possible, they're gonna choose Wikipedia, they're gonna choose the easiest. What's gonna keep them from doing that if they get the choice of the topic?
Well, it's a progression over high school, getting better. At the beginning of high school, you don't really know what's going on. At the end, hopefully you're good enough to do well in college. So I don't expect freshmen to right off the bat go into ProQuest and start looking at all these scholarly articles, because a lot of them are 80 pages long and they don't have that kind of dedication. So it's a process. Educating them that would take 4 years.
So just thinking about people I deal with, I see more people from abuse of the internet getting taken advantage of from false relationships through the internet, false advertisements, and otherwise getting milked out of money or other things versus I don't see that many flat earthers running around using money because they think they're practice flat. Misinformation is less dangerous than getting exploited on you. Wouldn't it be more for the greater good than just not prohibiting brown cows and flat earth?
Well, I'm not saying that we should prohibit anything, I'm just saying that we should educate people on how to spot ridiculous things on the internet. So that would include fake relationships and that would include ridiculous acts, the Nigerian princes.
So in your English classes, how many of your peers do you think actually read the reading assignment?
He drinks water.
The actual research paper rather than the middleman interpretation of it, which is basically the cliff notes, the highlights. I mean, how many high school kids have that kind of persistence?
Honestly, reading these articles are hard. I did it, a lot of people who did this project with me in my English class, we all read them and we trudged through them and it was awful, we hated it. And it would definitely be difficult to get kids to use these. When I was thinking.
You can't get them to read the fiction. That's my point.
We have ways.
When I was considering how we would teach freshmen or introduce them to these high-level academic writing, I was thinking that teachers would probably just go through a paper and just choose highlights of it and go through those and help kids understand what they're looking for. We do a lot of highlighting, like skimming and highlighting stuff that we should know early in our English classes. And something like that would be the same thing, how we treat 80 or 100-page scholarly papers. Because we don't need all the information from 100 pages.
So there's a lot of information out there that is accurate, that isn't just scholarly, on topics that are not quite as scholarly. How would you recommend teaching students to be able to figure out like a blog, what's factual in a blog versus not factual in a blog, or in cooking related topics or crafting related topics, or some of those sort of things?
Well, you need to take into account the website's reputation. There are certain websites where I wouldn't trust anything from just because of the nature of it. Like those of you computers can look up Age of Autism, and that's just a website dedicated to teaching people about how vaccines cause autism and obesity. I don't know what you believe, but they don't. And if it's something that can be verified through multiple sources, then we should. And if it's something like cooking, then they should try it themselves, and if it fails, it fails. Just see what happens.
Did you find any demographics pointing toward people who will be more apt to fall for misinformation?
No. It was everyone knows. This was my project. The ages, I don't know if you caught it, the ages were 14 to 65. The one no was not the 65-year-old guy. It was, so what this tells me is that people who use the internet perceive a big epidemic with misinformation. So in my personal research, I didn't find any correlation with any demographic that I surveyed for any misinformation.
What about the news? Is it Google's newsfeed that's supposed to have articles from various sources? Have you looked into any of that and how much more reliable that is?
No.
How do you think this would negatively affect efficiency through school and how they have to kind of prove how efficient and fast their educating is for like funding? I mean, situations like Wayne and fact checking, all the projects, how do we know that information might not be correct, but it is used for an efficient situation?
Well, thinking about education in terms of efficiency is like thinking about education as a machine shop, like slowly building a car and putting on the parts. It's not something that you want to get done as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Some students will get it, and some students will take more time, and that's fine as long as they learn.
Okay.
I want someone to put on water. Oh my god, I don't think so.
Baby! Oh my god! I know
John Oliver.
Yeah, and it makes more fun than it was at SNL. The ratings are up so much because of politics. Because someone would rather have it be funny and like have it like speak their voice instead of Hello.
Having a good time?
No.
It's good to hear opposing opinions.
Yeah. And then every time my opinion opposes that, Cecilia says, "Stop being mean," and I go, "No." Whenever she was shaking her head, she's going, "Stop being mean." You're gonna have to do this. And I'm like, I'll just joke my way through
I do actually so Jurassic. Reaction.
Yeah, I know. I'm so
Brian, that was so really. I know you don't mind.
I'm just having trouble. I'm just trying to
Today. What's up, guys? Today's great. Anyways,
It's a great day.
today was.
It's a great day to be alive. It's a great day. It's a day. It's a great day.
It is today.
Or it's not.
It's day to be alive and be there.
Be a bear.
I did that.
I did that one.
Caleb did.
Yeah, well, we do. In Adam's safe research, we have to whenever people get into college.
great day. And it's like,
We have to be alive and be cannibal.
Cannibal soup?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good.
Wait. Ew. That's really.
Did nothing. I went to go pop my knuckles and nothing happened.
Too sore.
I love Cortez.
I cannot see anything.
And then I told them the subway.
The beautiful baby boy.
You're so
Just had the beard and like someone.
so he yells at
That'd be so
Luckily, someone does. And then I got all the ones except for one because they didn't talk about what we did, and I was like, and then
Stop moving your people.
nothing.
I wasn't. I do know where that is. I thought. That hurt? Do that in slow.
Oh, I can't see him live. Louis! 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 Lord Argo!
It's like Shrek and then Arthur, and then it's like and Thor.
I was taking that here. And then his Morbius is the proctor. So like he was at me and I was like, I'm not sure. It's about
I have
For some reason, anything that's showing up here is reversed.
we have an apple.
Orange. Just ask red or green.
Orange. Can I have one as well?
I'll have a red one. Red.
I got orange.
There's orange. There's red. I'll get another one. That's really thanks, sir, but you don't know you got it from Mike does.
That hurt.
I can't.
That's gonna give me a bloody nose. I can feel it.
I'm excited to see Oh, I should.
I'm doing it a little water. So it's like white.
I have no idea. Okay. After this? Okay, oh, I see what you're saying. I said, are you like confused?
He doesn't believe that
You don't like it? Oh, I'm
There's different. There's different. I love
he is a Sagittarius too. So is he, but he's in
Thank you. Thank you. I was a little skeptical after the wonderful question. not questions.
That's what I was confused. I didn't even know what to answer. I was so perplexed. I was like,
You did great.
oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't think I thought inputting like Christianity, I thought I was gonna get ripped on that, but I was not ready for that. Women are the weaker vessels. Even reading in Hamlet, like this year, like just everything. Ophelia, yeah. And that's the major theme to all the Shakespeare plays. And I don't know, something I'm passionate about being a woman, you know, and equality. I'm saddened that some people don't even like have an open mind about it. Like that's what makes it like
Water science is basically
so there was an issue a while back where I had the same color pants.
Yeah, and
we could all wear the same color pants. Oh, she's freaked. She's like, well, yeah, and so ever since then, I've been treated so poorly in this classes, and I knew she had it out for me. And that's all I care about.
We're literally the best friend ever, but that's because we believe in it.
Yeah, well, and I care more about what you guys think. I mean, that doesn't
It was great. I really liked the evidence.
That honestly means a lot. I have a graduation announcement for you as well. Yeah, definitely. That makes me sad. I think so, yeah. Well, I try to think back at sophomore year, and it's like, because I just moved to Cortez, so it was definitely an adjustment. But really, I'm lucky to have teachers like you.
Anyway, you nailed it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jill. Are you an Aries?
Yes, he's an Aries. He's an Aries. I gave them a photo of getting friends with Danny because he's my Aries. And that's not your birthday. I can literally stand up and answer that. I've done a video on how that too, because it's literally and they're literally in my
I was like, oh, man, you got a whole.
I'm not for it's also because it's like kind of like a halfway house, all I care about is movies. Like I want to go to film school, so if I go there, I'll just like. Yeah, it's way hard. Since the people that are like, if you say a director, the first person that comes to mind is like it's bring in like a little they're just like even though like some of the best. Like most of my favorite shows, like the other day, I never even noticed the casting. Everything is driven by religion.
Were they live streaming Jesus? I know, but like,
Last time I checked it I religiously went last time, and for like a week I could do stuff. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, I'm still
It's like my hair doing that one time. It's like when she's all like, no, like, I really need my Okay, guys, our last one of the day. Matthew Broughton with language learning benefits.
Alright, so I'm Matthew Broughton, obviously, and I'm going to talk about the language learning benefits. So, by raise of hands, how many of you guys have taken a foreign language class in high school? Alright, so a lot of you. So a lot of you then are going to understand how learning a foreign language is a whole new way to think about something. It's a whole new way. As Flora Lewis said, learning another language is not only learning the different words for the same things, but learning another way to think about things, which is a cool thing to think about. So I'm going to first start off with the historical research and the benefits of a foreign language. I'm going to go over boosted test scores, the cognitive benefits of it, and the medical benefits of learning a foreign language. So let's start with test scores. I'm going to start with a test done by, the last name was Cooper, and his study was on the SAT test and how students not in a foreign language compared to students in a foreign language, how they scored, and students in the foreign language had boosted verbal parts of the test, like the reading, the writing, all of that were boosted in that test. And that was across all social classes. It was not just among, like, let's say, upper and white middle class. It was against all levels of classes. And then also, there was another study done by, his name was Saunders, and his thing was on the ITVS, which I'm sure some of you guys have taken. It's the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. It's a pretty broad test. It was given to a lot, more than just Iowa, it was given to the nation, basically. And what they did with this is, for students, they implemented a foreign language for 30 minutes a day for 4 years. And through those 4 years, those students, compared to the non-students, had boosted math scores throughout the test, like a lot. So that was a notable trend to that. Next, I'm going to talk about the cognitive benefits of learning a foreign language. So that is really the cognitive benefits were done with the Stroop test. And the Stroop test is the test that has the word red on the screen, but it's in blue font. And it makes you, this timeliness is an answer. Like, you have to answer what color the word is, not the, like, what the word says the color is or something like that. And it's done timeliness based. The people in a foreign language had foreign language in their, like, had taken a foreign language, performed better on this test. And that means they had better conflict management and the ability to increase in focus. And not only that, students also had better memory, like creativity with all this, and they had better connections of thought, because once you learn a foreign language, once you start learning a foreign language, there's connections made between the old language and the new language. And what happens is that it creates new pathways in your brain for like you a whole new way to think, like I said earlier. And that helps with a lot of the connections of thoughts and remembering things and stuff like that. So next I'm going to go over the medical benefits of learning a foreign language. So also when you're younger, you have better memory with age, but as you get older, it's also that better memory stays with you. And with that comes better executive control. And one of the biggest medical benefits that I could find is to do with Alzheimer's disease. And so with Alzheimer's disease, the brain would still form like it was getting Alzheimer's disease, but the symptoms would be delayed by 5.1 years compared to the people that had not taken a foreign language, which is like a long time of your older life. 5 years is a long time. And also in that 5 years, let's say in 2016, the average cost per month for Alzheimer's treatment and like making sure they're okay and all the care for them was $3,600 a month. At 5.1 years, that's over $220,000. So my thesis was the implication of a mandatory foreign language credit to graduate would benefit students' learning, create better thinkers, increase motivation, and help with potential medical problems in the future. And that's pretty self-explanatory. But my purpose was to determine the attitude towards students learning at MCHS of a foreign language rather than testing the benefits, because the benefits are already widely known. So I'd rather test the attitude of students at MCHS to see if it's a good idea to implement a mandatory credit. So I did this through a survey, and the survey consisted of 10 questions I pulled from a bigger survey that's been used multiple times. It's the attitude motivation test battery. And what I did with the survey is I selected questions from it that had all positive and negative answers. So by that I mean I asked a question about if you had heard a French song on the radio, whether you would shut it off immediately, which would be the negative answer, or if you would continue listening to the song, which would be the positive answer. So I had all those answers within there. And I gave this to all levels of the French students in the class. So French 1, French 2, French 3, and French 4. So there was no distinction there. So I'm going to talk about how I found throughout this positively motivated students. So 3 main things I found is I found motivation towards learning language in the classroom. There was a positive motivation towards that. And then students' attitude in the classroom was also positive toward learning. And the students' attitude outside of the classroom of applying this language and creating those new benefits of the mind was also positive. So I asked students if they would rather have their teacher speak just French, English, or a mixture of both in class. While this is obviously 82% of them said they would prefer the mixture. And this makes sense because students that are learning a new language obviously aren't going to be proficient in the language, so they don't want only French spoken, but they're trying to learn a new language, so they're going to want a mixture spoken. But what happens with this is that when the 2 languages are spoken side by side, that's when the benefits are created between the 2 languages. And this is where I firsthand experienced this, because I did this experiment because this applies to me. I didn't understand a lot of like grammar in English. Well, I understood what it was, but I understand the importance until I had taken a foreign language. And then I started to create those pathways between the languages, and that helped a lot with me understanding the importance of English and a lot of stuff in it. So then I got that students' attitude in the classroom was positive. So I asked if they would, if they would receive help on material they did not understand at all, and when they would, like directly after the test or directly after class or before the next test. And 88% of the students said they would receive help before the next test or right after class. And this suggests that the motivation of the students in the class is to pass the class, because they want to be able to understand what's going on in the class. And about 90% of them want to have that ability to pass the class because they want to understand everything that they're learning in there. And then I also tested the attitude outside the classroom. Students were asked if they heard a French song outside of the school, if they would turn off the song or continue listening. 2/3 of the students said they would continue listening to the music outside of the school. So that means 2/3 of the students I surveyed would want to continue to listen to this music outside of the school. So that means they're creating those new pathways not only in school and in class, but they have the potential to do it outside of school. And 2/3 of them have the motivation to do it outside of school, which I thought was cool. So I had some problems with my survey, and the first one was mainly that students failed to fill out the survey correctly. They failed to choose one answer when I asked them to choose one answer, and they also failed to not create their own answers. So that was something else. And then, so another problem that could be done with my survey is that I took questions from a 60-minute survey and a 60-question survey, the motivation test battery survey, and I dropped it down to 10 questions in 10 minutes. So that could change how some of those questions were perceived because the time was different and the questions were lowered in number. So I was able to conclude that the MCH has positively motivated students in our foreign languages because they obviously had wanted to perform well in the classes and all of that. And they were seeking a mixture of languages spoken, which is what I was hoping they would want. Because what happens with that is it creates those pathways that I talked about earlier. And then, so students could become more motivated like the students already in the class to learn a new language. And this would be by implication of a mandatory foreign language credit, which is what I want. Because students would then, to graduate, would have to have this mandatory foreign language credit, which means they would have to have that motivation to pass the class to graduate. And just because of that, the students would benefit from the cognitive benefits and the medical benefits and boost the test scores, like I said earlier. And more importantly, we'd create better minds at MCHS, which is the end goal of education. Questions?
Were the students that you surveyed, were they also French students, French class students? Or is this a general cross-section of the whole high school?
This was only French students because a lot of the questions I had favored to what is your motivation, like asking their motivation in class. And I asked that because if I asked for students' motivation that are not in French, of their motivation in French class, it wouldn't really be applicable to them. So that's why I did that.
So was this a little skewed because these students were already motivated?
So that's why I would make the credit mandatory, because then everyone has that beginning motivation to start this language. Because what it comes down to is they don't have to learn this language to be proficient in to get these benefits. They just have to get the basic, most bottom level, like nouns, verbs, all of that in a different language to start creating those pathways in the mind.
So are you making an assumption that by requiring something, we therefore motivate students? Because I think we can ask the math teachers how that works for them.
I think it would have to create some motivation, yes. To at least pass the class, yes.
Did you look at any research on when it is best in a person's development to learn a foreign language?
I did not do that, but for the benefits I was looking at, I think it would be best in high school to implement this because at lower levels, we're also just learning English. So then we're trying to learn dual languages and we don't realize the significance of some things in both languages just because we see a pattern. Because what I really saw is once I was in high school and I learned French, I saw the pattern between the languages and I realized how important those parts of the languages were. Yes?
So you talked about the cognitive benefits, like better connections and thought. What did you have anything neurological, or like what happens in the brain that creates those connections and thought?
So I think the brain actually, I'm trying to remember what it said.
You actually have to remember what your brain said.
Yeah. So I actually think it like reroutes your brain in some sort of way to now think in terms of both languages, which is what helps with memory of certain words and things like that. Yeah.
When you acknowledge the brain has to kind of think in different languages, It's because different languages kind of see the world differently. Some regard passage of time differently. You'll have a future imperfect. Others pay more attention to gender. Do you think these benefits only come from learning complete language systems that have grammar and syntax and everything? Or would lesser languages like computer programming also have the same benefits if students study that?
So for the benefits that I'm looking at, I think it would primarily come from languages that are like spoken languages and languages that have like a spoken and written form rather than just what language you referenced. I forgot what it was.
Any form of computer coding, or for that matter, music is a language?
So I think music would also have the same benefits a lot because it's also a whole new way to think about stuff, which is creating those new pathways, which is basically what foreign language does, and it's a whole new way to think about something, which is what creates those.
So would that let you have band as count as your foreign language requirement? Because I was kind of curious if you and David were counting the same SAT increases if the foreign language people also took music and y'all were counting the same thing.
So yeah, that could work because the implication of the credit is to help with cognitive abilities, and anything that could potentially substitute to help with cognitive abilities and you're still getting those benefits, I don't feel like you should have to double dip because then you're just doing the same thing twice.
Did you look at so the state of Utah took what you're talking about and created the dual language immersion program and implemented it over 100 schools. Did you look into the research on the results that they actually have from putting what you're saying into place?
No, I do not. So time of run. Okay.
Do you think
So you said there was a 5-year boost on Alzheimer's
Yes.
patients. Was that from learning a language like when you're in high school, or is that from knowing a language?
That was from actually knowing the language, but what students could still benefit is if we start them in high school learning the beginning of that language and they become motivated to learn the entire language, we would have a lot more students with that possibility to actually do that because they would never know if they liked the language if they were never in it.
Back to your survey questions, the statistical questions, did you use their analysis to determine correlation and statistical significance, or did you look into any of that?
I did not really look into that because what they did for their scoring was more based off sums of the whole people that have taken it, and I didn't want to break it down like that, so I did not go off their scoring guide.
I didn't follow that. They went off of what?
So each question, what they did is they would value one question as a 3, a 2, and a 1 for each answer on it. So a different scoring. I use different. Yes.
Are you just wanting to do the romantic languages, or do you think this could be kind of a dual solution to something like what was in Nanabaw's presentation about how her language is being lost? Do you think you could implement that in schools to preserve those languages that aren't being saved? If they were required, that would broaden their understanding of it and be a solution for her issues also? Or are you just wanting the more romantic, widely?
So we'd obviously have to start with the languages we have at the school to stay within our budget. That way we can implement this first, and if it works exceedingly, we can obviously extend upon that if students require that, but at the beginning, I don't think we need to start a bunch of random programs and fund that when we're not 100% sure that it'll be positive results in our community. Yes.
Why did you only survey the French class instead of the Spanish class as well?
So the survey I had pulled from was based on French. There's actually a lot of the surveys from the motivation test battery. There's a lot of different classes I could have done. I chose the French so that I would have the teacher and everything consistent and have that as all my variables consistent and just be changing the question.
Yeah, like asking all the football players if there should be more football.
Well, if we force people to play football, yeah.
Right, with the benefits, so I'm just gonna pull football players and whether we should have more football.
I mean, it's not really the same. One's learning a language, one's smashing heads.
What percentage of students here at MTHS are taking foreign language, and then how many more will need to get in there?
So if I actually don't know the real numbers, but I can try to do some math. I would say about just under 200 students would be in our foreign languages. About 150?
Yeah.
So about 150 students would be in our foreign languages. And I don't know how many, I actually don't know how many students are in the school, so whatever that was.
So this is gonna be an increase in teachers that will need?
I don't think so, because we're also having students, we have two weights teachers, one weights teacher and one health, like half weights and half health teacher. We're able to get all the students their credits throughout those two people throughout their 4 years. And we have 3 foreign language teachers, so we could get 2. And then we have the Native American club. All right, not anymore. So we have 2 doing that. And that would be about the same, and I feel like we could get all students to do that. Because there would obviously be exceptions for, like you guys are saying, for band and all that. Those kids could be exempt if they would desire to be, because they're still getting those benefits in a different way.
So to piggyback on that question, students who are already bilingual, they come from Spanish-speaking households, or we have from Mandarin-speaking households, would they be required to have the credit?
In a different language, yes. We're not going to make a fluent Spanish speaker take Spanish once. We're going to make them take French once.
Just don't tell them you can speak it.
Yes.
So language is one of those things that's very divisive for cultures, it's a barrier between understanding different cultures. Do you think that requiring students to be more immersed in other languages will help kind of make them more accepting and integrating the United States and all of its varied cultures?
I mean, there's the potential for that, yeah.
Did you find any research on that?
No, I didn't do that. I was
Yeah. You come to a lot of articles.
We good?
I like your shirt. Thank you.
It's very cute. It suits you well. How does that relate to learning French?
That was
Yes, I would.
What? He said that questions impossible? Yeah.
He was like, oh, wait.
It's like, I don't know, but yes.
He said, wait, hold on the presentation. My iPad's dying.